How's it going? I'm Justin Giboney, and I want to talk to you about Christian civic engagement. As you well know, an election is coming, and the saints are uptight. Nerves are frayed, Twitter fingers are quick and calloused, and to make matters more complicated, a Supreme Court justice just passed away only weeks ago. There's even a question as to whether partisans on both sides of the aisle are in a state of mind or in an emotional state to accept an unfavorable election outcome. Social media is a war zone where even Christians proclaim empty ideological rhetoric like it's the gospel, spitting buzzwords and vitriol like it's the good news. Some left-leaning Christians have conspicuously stopped talking about Christian compassion, while left-leaning Christians wouldn't dare let their progressive friends catch them tweeting affirmation of the sanctity of life or the Christian sexual ethic. Some conservatives are acting like those videos of police brutality don't exist, while progressives pretend that violent crime doesn't exist. And all the while, the grassroots continue to suffer under the tyranny of both realities. Come quickly, Lord Jesus. Now, I'm not here to tell you who to vote for, but make no mistake, your vote on November 3rd matters. Elections have consequences, and this is no time for indecision or ambiguity. Our faith ought not be used as a means of escapism or a way of denying the weight and gravity of the moment. We must step into the tension of the time and let our public witness reflect our God-given identity and purpose in the civic space. Our faith, however, should provide us with perspective, with a foundation and with firm footing in uncertain and tumultuous times. Christian civic engagement is the art and science of applying the sacred to the secular, while not allowing the secular to become sacred. So take this election seriously, but let not your faith rest on the results of this election. What will be the condition of your heart on November 4th and perhaps the weeks and months of fallout thereafter? Will you be drunk off the thrill of victory, reveling in the triumphalism of a tribal win? Alternatively, will you be wallowing in the bitter agony of defeat, brokenhearted without a word of hope or encouragement for your suffering neighbor? Or will you faithfully remain sober and resolved in the encouragement or discouragement of the outcome, judicious and unbowed, knowing that an election, win or lose, never fully determines the fate of those your civic action is intended to defend? The immigrant, the uninsured, and the unborn will still need clear-eyed and persistent advocates, no matter who wins the Oval Office, the Senate, and the House. Every 4 years, we're promised our every heart's desire, and then we're left with a handful of IOUs and excuses when the people we fawned over don't deliver. Christians, when will we realize that no election is ever really a decisive victory in and of itself? It's not the time to hand off the rights and concerns of those in need to the next group of ambitious politicians. We can't simply wait for others to deliver. We have to deliver. It's time for Christians to re-articulate and reapply the compassion and the conviction of the gospel, and to hold those elected accountable, whether we voted for them or not, but especially if we voted for them. When November 4th and the unpredictable thereafter comes, will you remain vigilant, waiting and watching? Will you hold the Democrats accountable for the low-income housing crisis in their districts, where the poor can't even live in urban centers unless they're living on the streets? Will you hold Republicans accountable for how their healthcare policies or lack thereof have shut down rural hospitals, leaving those who are dying of deaths of despair in an even more desperate situation? Or will you settle for defending your party and your tribe at all costs? Will you be too caught up in the fray to think critically and to avoid being a generic Democrat or a generic Republican? You see, the AND campaign has consistently asserted that Christians are in need of a complete paradigm shift, an entirely different way of thinking when it comes to how we view and engage politics. We must re-examine and reassess our identity and purpose in the cultural and political space. Who are we in the socio-political arena? And what have we been sent to accomplish? Not what do we want to accomplish or what we think is in our best interest to accomplish, but what has a just and righteous God sent us to accomplish? It's okay to be in a political party, but Lord have mercy on our souls if we continually allow Christian political engagement to be a weak, knockoff version of political conservatism or secular progressivism, a mediocre theatrical display of American pride and prejudice, where Christians outsource our political opinions and our social action to washed up political parties. God forbid that our civic work would continue to be an unimaginative and sloppy construct of counterfeit architecture, tailor-made in the image of the idols of the day. Many of us have a hard time delineating where partisanship ends and where our political theology begins. If we're seeking validation from progressives, then we'll be willing to embrace a social justice with no moral order. That's a lesser justice. On the other hand, if our desire is to be confirmed by conservatives, then we'll espouse a morality that lacks compassion, a perverted sense of law and order that lacks justice. But you see, Christian political engagement must be detached from the broken partisanship and mob mentality politics prevalent today. Our contribution can no longer perpetuate the mess that plagues our political landscape. Nehemiah 6 tells us that when Nehemiah was rebuilding the wall in Jerusalem, a group of men who had conspired against him asked him to come down and to have a meeting with them. In verse 3, he responds by saying, I am doing a great work. I cannot come down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and come down to you? Christian political engagement must be understood and approached in the same way as a profound civic work, a great work. And hyperpartisanship and pettiness and the mob mentality amount to coming down. They amount to descending. It's stopping the work and attending to distractions that separate us from our mission. On November 4th, and whatsoever happens thereafter, will you come down or will you continue building, continue doing a great work? You see, Christian politics must be more than Christian self-interest. It must be more than a hobby or sadistic entertainment. It cannot just be about waiting for the next clip of our political opponents to be humiliated. My proposition today is that political engagement for the Christian isn't primarily an occasion to pursue our preferences and financial interests, nor should it be used as a tool to settle the score with our most bitter rivals. On the contrary, politics as for Christians is a robust opportunity to love our neighbors by defending human dignity and promoting human flourishing. It's a forum for displaying the justice and moral order of a God who so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. Our public witness must be a distinctly Christian endeavor that can only be accomplished by those who have genuinely been crucified with Christ. And as a result, they are able to act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with their God. But not just theoretically, not just in the abstract, but in our daily public witness, which can be more difficult than it sounds. Let's think about it. To act justly, even when our tribe urges us to abuse our power through acts of vengeance. To love mercy in the presence of bloodthirsty allies and opponents who have viciously wronged us. To walk humbly in a culture that promotes identity idolatry and unlimited self-expression at all costs. Our political engagement must be a profound civic work, a great work. It's not to be taken lightly or to be used for our own frivolous purposes. Let me give you a historical example. Imagine, if you will, Frederick Douglass preparing for a debate on the subject of abolition as his people continue to suffer through the dark night of American slavery. Pen in hand, memories of braided bullwhips and rusted chains running through his mind, knowing full well that his brothers were still being beaten like mules and that his sisters were still having their babies torn from their grasp, raped and disregarded without recourse. And yet he had to construct a cogent, constitutional, and moral case without allowing his emotions to pull him into logical fallacies. He had to articulate the pain of generations of disinherited Black souls without flinching and without sinning under the weight of his anger. This couldn't have been just a casual or haphazard undertaking. It certainly wasn't a task to be neglected or trifled with. No, it was an opportunity to knock down the gates of hell, a chance to expose the devil's dealings, to emancipate God's children and change the world. As Douglass shrewdly maneuvered through the halls of power, this couldn't have been just another day at the office, a leisure stroll through the civic landscape. No, it was a chance to slay giants, to bid the kingdom come, a chance to serve notice about God's will and to advocate that his will be done. How dare we reduce our public witness to tribal sparring? How dare we allow our public witness not to be a declaration of faith? It should be a testament to the excellence of being bound to the ultimate purveyor of grace and truth. A Christian public witness confined to the limits of progressivism or conservatism is a witness squandered, a light hidden. It's a praise and worship chorus on mute. Does your political engagement reveal the will of God? So that even if we lose a particular political battle, we've still testified. We've borne witness. We've shined a light in the darkness. The state of our public witness on November 4th and the toxic thereafter will greatly depend on if we have the faith to proceed with moral imagination. Moral imagination is the ability to see not simply what has been historically or what is in the present moment, but the ability to see what could be in the future, what ought to be. It's hope in the midst of oppression, division, and vitriol. It's not a pipe dream. It's more like the Hebrew vision of the land promised, but yet to come. It's what convinced Frederick Douglass to learn how to read and write while still in chains, and when nothing in his physical line of sight indicated that he would ever be able to put his talents to use. Moral imagination is exactly what our sociopolitical landscape is missing today. We settle for Pyrrhic political victories because we can't see past this election cycle. We trade insult for insult because we don't have the moral imagination to understand that human dignity isn't scarce. We don't have to battle over it. We don't have to hoard it for ourselves. It's abundant and it's innate. Those with moral imagination refuse to lower the standard. They refuse to lower the discourse just because their opponents have chosen to wade in the muck, in the mire. They have the capacity to play by the rules, even when they've taken a loss at the hands of foul play. It takes moral imagination not to have an opposition-centered public witness in a polarized environment. It takes moral imagination to see what the moment is hiding from you. It reveals what's there, but undetected by conventional wisdom. Moral imagination prevents us from being enslaved by the moment. It enables us to participate in partisan politics without seeing the world through a partisan lens. It assures us that there's more than two ways to solve a problem. And it emboldens us, maybe most importantly, to uphold timeless Christian convictions, even when popular culture mocks us or threatens us. It reveals that there is indeed love in inconvenient truths. Faith produces moral imagination. And moral imagination affords us the vision, aspiration, and determination necessary to build a better civic space, even when the prospects of doing so seem bleak or irrational. It gives us the capacity to see and understand what we have in common with someone who is taunting or offending us. It forces us to recall that everyone has a story and everyone has a testimony, even if their anger and their prejudice hides it from us. On November 4th and the crazy thereafter, what will be the state of your heart? Will you be able to be Christian in that moment rather than generically Republican or generically a Democrat? Thanks for having me. God bless you.
Well, now we have a chance to go in a little deeper with Justin, so I'm thrilled for this opportunity for us. And Justin, thank you so much for joining with us in this occasion. One of the things we love to hear from the people who come and speak to us, and a thing that's really important to us as we talk about the issue of convictions and oftentimes conflicting convictions, is we love to hear a little bit of the backstory a person has. How did you come to have the beliefs and convictions you have? What were some of the big influences, mentors, maybe life experiences that sort of shaped you in the way you see the world and have formed your Christian convictions?
Oh, that's a good question. And thank you for having me again. You know, one of the places where I start is always with my grandfather, who was a pastor. And who taught me a lot about the character of God, not only through his sermons, but really through his life. And so that's someone that he was a preacher kind of in that civil rights era. And that's someone who I always think about as I go speak and think about the example that he set. So that's part of where it starts. Obviously, my two parents, as far as how I think, a lot of Martin Luther King's writings have been important to me. Also, Howard Thurman. And G.K. Chesterton, the book Orthodoxy, really helped me get through being in some really non-Christian, very progressive spaces. And so I think those kind of helped shape me. And I've just always had an interest in politics. And I think through my journey, God has made it clear that that's, that intersection between faith and politics is where he wanted me to be. And I just draw a lot of encouragement and strength from people in my community, but also from the folks who fought in the civil rights movement. And that's kind of where my mentality comes from.
And was there any particular thing that got you going on the AND campaign? Was this something that kind of just came to you? Was there an opportunity that came from other places? How did you get involved in the leadership of this?
Yeah, so it really started. So I'm an attorney, but I've been a political strategist for over a decade. And as I was running campaigns and just, interacting in politics, I began to discover that a lot of my friends who wanted to run for office, it was almost a given that some of their Christian convictions they would have to leave behind, that they wouldn't be able to talk about the sanctity of life and things like that. And I started thinking, well, people in my community, the people I go to church with, we value those things. Why is it that because I'm in kind of this progressive urban space that we can't voice that when we want to run for office, even though we'd be representing people who cared about those things? And I just began to realize that the reward and punishment mechanism was kind of controlled by different groups, and that the church really needed to organize to make sure that we represented both the justice that we see talked about throughout the Bible, but also the moral order. And so I began to see this false dichotomy where Christians who emphasize social justice would go to the left, and Christians who emphasize moral order would go to the right. But the gospel, I really felt, was both. As Apostle Paul says in Ephesians 4:15, we need to speak the truth in love. And I think that means, in some ways, we need to have compassion and conviction, and we shouldn't let our political affiliation separate those two things. So as I kind of began to understand that false dichotomy or false dilemma, I began to kind of think through and reading the Bible, kind of articulate what I think is a gospel-centered witness about the compassion and conviction. And that's where AND campaign comes from.
Oh, that's great. Now that intrigues me. I was just meeting with a couple of faculty, like a small group of faculty the other day, and many were talking about feeling politically homeless because of this, in effect, what you just described. There's certain things they value very deeply that is represented in one party, certain other things that are represented in the other party. And then they had this feeling of, where do I go? How do I resolve this tension? And I'm intrigued. How do you navigate? Do you feel it is better to attach yourself and support a particular party and kind of press on despite the fact certain things are left over? Do you feel like, no, I need to go back and forth, kind of operate as an independent? How do you best navigate those waters?
A few things. I think we have to, number one, that tension is good. I think
Okay.
people kind of worry about feeling that tension. I think every Christian should feel
We
that
don't,
tension.
we don't like that tension, man. That's not a happy space.
Yeah. A lot of Christianity is about living in a tension. And so we should embrace that. And I think the problem would be if we didn't feel that tension, if we were so at home in one party or the other that we didn't care about the places where they fell well short of the gospel. But for me, one of the things I try to do is separate my identity from my political engagement. So I can be in a party, but my identity is not in my party. I don't feel like my party is my tribe. I feel like my party is a tool. It's a tool I use in politics to get certain things done. And so, if you're to assume because I'm a Democrat, if you assume a whole lot about me, you're probably assuming too much. You can be a Democrat and be pro-life. I think you can be a Republican and be about racial justice and civil rights and all those things. But you can use it as a tool. And when you think of it that way, you don't expect so much from the party. You don't expect for them to represent everything you believe. But where they fall short, you do need to kind of critique that and challenge it. And that's what I try to do. I try to critique and challenge the areas where my party may fall short, because I can't just accept it and want my party to win and not care about some of those places where they really get some things critically wrong.
And do you feel comfortable speaking up publicly, so to speak, about the shortfallings of your political party might be attached with, or do you feel like you need to keep that kind of at bay?
Not only do I feel comfortable about it, I think I have to do it. I think the only way to have real conversations for Christians when partisan politics is such a big part of the conversation is to admit where your party gets it wrong. And I think that opens up a lot of conversations that normally wouldn't go too far when we're trying to kind of protect these partisan narratives, which in many cases are actually a lot of fiction. And so I think Christians need to challenge and to be open and honest about where their party falls short so that they can separate themselves and kind of take the guard down of other Christians who might be in another party.
Yeah, it's always struck me that it seems really strange that we would have the expectation that our Christian commitments would map nicely onto either one of the political parties, simply because neither political party shaped their platform with the intention of being biblical or being Christian. We don't have religious political parties. And if we try to make them that way, we should have no expectation it would have a very good fit. We might have to wear the clothing, but it's going to need a whole lot of alterations.
That's exactly right. We expect too much from the political parties. That they would kind of cater to us. We need to use them as tools. And I think when we think of it that way, we won't be so hurt about that tension or about feeling somewhat homeless.
Yeah, I think that's a great word about kind of scaling back our expectations. And then also with it, our sort of dread and kind of the apocalyptic language we use for what will happen next with the outcome of an election, as if Jesus will suddenly leave. If you're going to vote in a guy like that, I'm out of here. That seems to be the way we speak, even within the church. And I think there's a part of that that's actually borders on blasphemous when we begin to think of how big we're making our political things in comparison to how we make Jesus himself, which seems to me to be kind of deeply problematic for us as a church. Let me just pick up on you talked a little bit about having a moral imagination and not just kind of operating in the boxes and with the givens that we seem to get from our culture. I'd love to have you just tell us, just give us a spark of your own moral imagination as you look at our society and say, boy, maybe here's a way to frame it. I think of Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech that is this wonderful series of statements of what I think you're talking about here, this moral imagination. I dream of a place where that my children might be judged by the content of the character instead of the color of their skin. Those are those moments that I think, man, that is sparking something. What are some of the things that you see as you look in our moment, our time, that kind of you have a spark of moral imagination for, hey, we could do different or we could do better?
Yeah, moral imagination to me is to say that you're not going to be a slave to the moment, that you're not going to be a slave to history. You're going to understand history. You're not going to downplay it, but that you're going to look at what could be and really what ought to be. And one of the things that where it plays out for me is, again, in partisanship, not just accepting what the two parties give you. Too often Christians, because we're lacking in moral imagination, we say, well, that party's better than the other one, so I'm just going to go with whatever they say and choose a side, as people say. Well, you can choose a side to some extent, but you have to have the moral imagination to challenge it so that it can be better. I think another place is I really believe that Christians, regardless of what party they come from, regardless of the demographic, can come together on a set of issues and change this political landscape. I really believe that can happen, whether it's white evangelicals, folks from the Black traditional church, our Hispanic brothers and sisters. We can come together and do that despite of the polarization if we emphasize biblical principles and kind of throw some of this ideology and partisanship to the side.
Yeah, it is an interesting thing if you think of, what is sort of the playing field we gather on. If that is marked by what we gather on the Democratic platform or the Republican platform, you lose a whole lot of space that could be far more profitable if we gather people together on a context of we share in common a commitment to Christ. And in light of that commitment and the vision we have for what our society might look like, what might we do together? It would be kind of an inspiring moment to be part of that. Let me just ask you one other question. What is something that gives you hope? What is the hope that gets you up in the morning when you go to do the things you do every day?
Yeah, I receive hope, number one, from my peers. And so I have so many talented peers that can go and speak to different demographics of Christians and really communicate, whether it's Dr. Charlie Dates, Dr. Esau McCauley, Lisa Fields, Jackie Hill Perry, Alan Noble. When I'm around these people, they just encourage me because I see that God is moving, that God's lifting up leaders that have orthodoxy and orthopraxy and can speak to other groups and really communicate. That really holds me up. And then it's people in my community. It's the elders in my church who believe in what I'm doing and believe that I'm going to do the right thing and represent them properly. That's what really gives me hope and keeps me fighting.
That's great. So a deep attachment to a community of others, like-minded believers pursuing some of those same goals and inspiring you as you do your part as well.
Exactly.
Well, that's great. Any one word you would want to say to our students just in parting here, say in terms of as you look ahead, we are, as you mentioned, moving through this election cycle. One of our concerns is that we go through this election cycle and we make progress out of it. We don't want to just say, hey, because things are as contested as we have to go with the current, so to speak. So any parting word you'd give to our students, you'd say, hey, remember this or be sure to do something.
Yeah, my parting word would be, this is a moment for Christian courage. And it actually does take courage to do justice in a way that's biblical, to talk about morality in a way that's biblical and not just like progressives or conservatives talk about it. Have the courage to be not just a generic Democrat or a generic Republican, but a distinctive Christian in your witness. And I think it's really incumbent on this generation that's in college right now to have that courage to stand up not only against those on the other side, but sometimes to challenge the folks on your side.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us, Justin. And we're thrilled that you joined us as part of your chapel experience. We encourage you to participate in our future chapels in this series on contemporary issues. We have David French and others who are participating with these things, and it's a wonderful opportunity to stop and think just a little bit more deeply about how our Christian conviction intersects with the public square in which God has placed us. Thanks so much for joining us, and go in peace.
Discover who you're called to be at Biola University, a leading Christ-centered university in Los Angeles, with programs on campus and online. Subscribe for more of our videos and learn more at biola.edu.